translating and transforming character from vulnerable obliviousness to advanced consciousness, venturing the path of niche and destiny. Throughout history, we have been immersed in a wide variety of tales and fables of wonderment that not only unveils a new aspect of ourselves, but facilitates us with deciphering components of complex questions that linger within our minds. One such question includes the following: how do we know when we are fully conscious of ourselves and the world that we live in? And through answering this, we can also discover how does said consciousness contribute to peace and justice. In the story of Psyche and Eros, Psyche blindly followed the ill advice of her sisters to unveil the identity of her husband, Eros, and as a consequence of responding to her sister's deception, Psyche realized her obliviousness and began to uncover her advanced state of consciousness, despite the sacrifices of losing her husband and home. But despite the dismal situation, this did not deter Psyche from venturing onwards with her life to survive, especially with the assistance of her comrades such as Eagle, giving her strength to trek on forward. Psyche's transition from a state of vulnerable obliviousness to advanced consciousness revives a moment in my own life where my obliviousness shifted into enlightened consciousness as a result of recognizing bigotry I had been immersed in during my past in the church, which would result in making sacrifices that inevitably held both negative and positive consequences in my path towards my survival and my purpose to advance peace and justice with my knowledge and passions of criminology for hate crime victims to receive justice and for offenders to receive their comeuppance. Similarly to Psyche, in another story, The Magic Brocade and the Stone Horse, the transition from vulnerable obliviousness to its extreme opposite, advanced consciousness, is demonstrated through the youngest son of the dying widow. More specifically, when he had to realize that his self-centered older brothers would never return to save their mother from perishing from the heartache of losing her brocade, and in order to ensure the well-being of his mother, he needed to take the initiative and venture out to the big unknown to retrieve the brocade, no matter what the difficult repercussions and sacrifices, such as losing his two front teeth to make the stone horse travel, or venturing through Fire Mountain in the icy sea, that he needed to endure in order to ensure that his aspirations of saving his mother would come into fruition. Here, the youngest son demonstrates that to become cognizant of the world around you and attain a sense of betterment for themselves and others around them, making sacrifices is imperative to achieve further to the path of our aspirations. In Homer's epic, the Odyssey, the transition from the contrast of vulnerable obliviousness to advanced consciousness, while acknowledging the importance of sacrifice, is demonstrated through Odysseus and the challenges he's faced, specifically Scylla, a six-headed serpent, and Charybdis, a deadly whirlpool. Odysseus had been previously oblivious in how to decipher the difficult decision of having to ensure a safe passage away from the formidable Scylla and Charybdis, but eventually had to face a situation in which the sacrifice of some of his men was necessary to survive, and while this brought great distraught, the end result was his emerging advanced consciousness in regards to recognizing that to be strong, both in mind and heart, one must be willing to give up something in order to attain an aspiration, which in this case was to arrive back home to his wife. While unfortunate that no matter how hard we try to advance our consciousness, the malevolent entities of the world will attempt to keep us oblivious and divert our paths to destiny. This is why we must not permit them to conquer us with ignorance, but rather we surmount them with knowledge and compassion, despite potential sacrifices. One instance of a historical individual who did just this was gay liberation and AIDS activist Marsha P. Johnson, who was involved in the Stonewall riots during the late 1960s, and ACT UP, an organization dedicated to ensure that AIDS victims received equal benefits from an oppressive and bigoted society who disregarded marginalized groups such as the LGBTQ+ community, minorities, and the disenfranchised. Despite her contributions, Miss Johnson recognized that she had to venture through and experience difficult decisions, such as experiencing bigotry from government officials and law enforcement, to further her aspirations to allow the lives of the consistently oppressed to be shielded from the lingering injustice that occurred throughout the world. Similarly, in Dr. Seuss's Horton Hears a Who, Horton the elephant also demonstrates how the notion of being able to discern what others initially cannot, such as in the case of the minuscule but significant whos, can further advance the consciousness within ourselves and others, extinguish false beliefs that causes the scrutiny and erasure of many, and contribute to the expansion of peace and justice for all, despite sacrifices that occurred along the way. Figures such as Horton and Miss Johnson remind me of myself through my endeavors to break away from my oblivious sense of self and embrace my conscious sense of self, so that I may sustain my niche of enlightening others, of open-mindedness, inclusiveness, and the injustice that the oppressed of our society endure, along with effacing the fictitious notion that since progression has occurred amongst the oppressed of the world, that issues of bigotry and ignorance has ceased to remain prevalent. It is imperative to continue venturing forward and fight the long battle with injustice to save and strengthen the voices of those who may not have a savior, such as Horton for the Who's, from falling into the crevices of obscurity. Thank you for watching.